And that's the thing that patriarchy does. It kind of says, okay, these are the rules, but then we need to have sacrificial examples of, and this is what will happen if you step out.
What happens if you break the rules?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Unquiet Sisterhood, a place where we can talk about real life, work, love, and more from a feminist perspective. I'm Jen Pavich, your host, and now let's dive right in. Hey there, and welcome to the inaugural episode of the Unquiet Sisterhood podcast. For this first episode, I'm super excited to be talking with my dear friend Jo Casey about feminine conditioning. We're going to talk about the myths of modern womanhood and how the patriarchy is often at work inside our heads and what we can do about it. So a little about Jo. Jo is a business coach and mentor who helps women overcome their feminine conditioning and build sustainable businesses. She teaches women how to market themselves without resorting to sleazy or manipulative tactics. Jo is the founder of both the Meaningful Business Academy and the Meaningful Business Podcast. And Jo also runs an amazing 9-month program called the Supernova Collective, of which I am an alumna. I will put the links to all of this in the show notes, and let's get going.
So, hi, Jo. Thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Hi, Jen. This is lovely and a little bit strange because we often talk and we don't often record it and then broadcast it.
I was thinking the same thing. I know it's going to be, just like a chat like we always have, right? But
Yeah,
now we're
sure.
recording it and
Do
broadcasting.
we chat? I think we rant and we rage and we hex.
I think we do all of
And we
the
laugh
above.
a lot. Yeah.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
So it's been a while, though, since we chatted. So tell me a little bit about what's going on in your world. What do you I usually ask everybody that comes on, what are you rumbling with right now? What's kind of making you curious or unquiet or uncomfortable?
On a personal level, I've just wrapped up a launch of my group program, which is how we met. Many months ago. And so I'm tired. And again, I'm in the place where so many of my clients are, I've been revisiting that kind of, I gotta be super visible and I've got to wrestle with all of my own stuff about that. Of, am I being obnoxious? Is there too much of me? Am I too much? Am I sending too many emails? Am I on Facebook too much? I at one point had this my husband was off to work and he said, "What are you doing today?" And I went, "I don't know, but I'm sick of my face." What? And it's because I'd been posting so much on Facebook and Instagram and sending emails with my little face at the bottom, not my little face, a little picture of my face. I'm so sick of my face. So a lot of what's been going on, certainly quite intensely for the past few weeks, is that kind of discomfort around being a public woman, and I'm enjoying the retreat back into a more kind of, I'm still a public woman because I have a business and it's online and, to be able to do that, but not to do it quite as intensely. But it was a great reminder of why we find this stuff so hard.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a nice, kind of segue into talking about feminine conditioning, which is kind of, obviously the term that I learned from you and something that we both kind of work a lot with in our businesses. So why don't we start with kind of explaining what it is, and maybe I can tell the story of how I discovered your work to begin with. So when I was in my master's program, I was doing a lot of work around feminism and women's studies and internalized oppression. And I, to be honest, can't even remember how I happened upon your website. It might have been through Andrea Owen. Anyway, and one of the first things that it says on your website is, I almost want to just read it out because it's so powerful. But you say that in order for us to run a business, we have to be public and sorry, I'm trying to bring it up and it's coming up really slowly.
Do you want me to read it?
Do you have it right there? That would be splendid.
A good business requires visibility. It needs you to take up space, get seen, and be heard. Being a good woman requires the exact opposite, and therein lies the tension.
Yes. And at the time, I was a fledgling business owner, and I was like, and I was kind of looking at the difference between what I was studying, academically and kind of what I was doing in my business. And that it just all like came together in a big lightning bolt to the brain.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have to say, it's one of those, you get these flashes of inspiration, not very often, I have to say, but this was one of those when I kind of came up with that encapsulation about what is it that is the focus of my work and why are so many of us struggling with this thing. And when I was designing the website, it was kind of January, February-ish, 2017.
Okay.
And the 2016 US general election had just sent this shockwave, I think, through a lot of the world. I'm in the UK, but I'm such a political junkie that I'd followed it really, really intensely. I'd stayed up and watched that second presidential debate, and I guess because also I'm not in the US, I had been, I think, protected from a lot of the anti-Bill and Hillary Clinton stuff over the years. So we didn't have this. So my memory of Hillary Clinton was when there was the Monica Lewinsky stuff, which is, I think in hindsight, we now look back on it, us progressive women, and kind of go, oh, that was, yeah. Okay.
There's a lot that's trouble.
Yes. Yes. But at the time, I remember her saying something like, I'm not some Tammy Wynette, stand by your man, and I'm not going to stay home and bake cookies. And I kind of thought, okay, yeah, she's kind of quite, she's not a pushover. And I quite like this woman. And over the years, she's Secretary of State and things like that. And so I guess I had this distance. I didn't have any great animus towards her. I didn't have any great love for her particularly, just that she seemed like a really, really competent woman. And then as the election went on, I could not understand why this was not just the easiest decision ever. And then as the amount of misogyny got piled on, and as the amount of vitriol got piled on, and even from the so-called liberal media, it was like, this woman can't do anything right. It's impossible for her to get any of this right. It's impossible. She can't laugh right. She can't smile right. She's either too soft and loving, or she's not soft and loving enough. It was impossible. And it just reminded me so much of, isn't that true for women? And if you're a woman of color, if you're from, another marginalized group, then you can just multiply that by 100.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's impossible to win at this game because the game was not designed for us. The game was certainly not designed for us to win. And so I started thinking about it much more in terms of my own work, which is working with business owners. And the business owners I work with, they're very passionate. They're very, how would I describe them? I guess heart-centered, but they put a lot of themselves into it. It's like they kind of rip open the skin of their chest and kind of go, here's my heart and my soul. And this is what I would like you to hire me for. It's not like, oh, here are my lovely T-shirts or something, although some of my clients do sell lovely, lovely things as well. But it's very personal to them, their work. And so that adds an extra layer of personalization to that being out there.
And it's very vulnerable. It's, when your product is essentially yourself, that's a super vulnerable place to be.
Yeah. And so I'd just seen this extremely competent, extremely qualified woman be absolutely denigrated day after day after day in the kind of misogynistic terms that I think in polite society had convinced us were no longer issues. You know, I think for a lot of us white women,
post-feminist era,
we
right?
were, yeah. I think particularly for us, a lot of us white women, we kind of thought we had left a lot of that stuff behind, and we'd made a lot more progress than it turns out we actually have. I think,
and I agree that the election really illustrated that. But I think too, what it illustrated for me was that, yes, there are things that I thought that we've left behind. And it's the only reason that I think that is because here is all of the work that I am doing to kind of make up for the fact that I'm a woman.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And to kind of make it okay, to make the fact that I'm a woman okay for men.
Yeah. So not too threatening, the number of times I kind of want to pinch myself or do that exercise where you have an elastic band around your wrist to kind of break a habit of every time I say, I'm a feminist, but I don't hate men. And it's like, why am I still
God, I know.
Explain that? Why is that? No. But, it almost feels like I internally feel I have to do that more. I'm one of the good feminists. I'm not one of those.
Yes. How can I apologize for my existence enough to make it okay with you that I'm here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as I was going through this kind of this rebrand and writing all this copy, I was also literally crying in terror at some point during the day, just going, this is insane. Why am I doing this? I'm burning down a perfectly good business here. Why do I want to out myself with this? But it was almost like I couldn't not name this thing now. Now isn't it, once you've seen something, you can't unsee it?
Yeah.
And so I launched the website, I think February 2017.
Which is so funny because I think that's right around the time that I found you. I must have been one of the first people to kind of happen upon it. That's very
and so here's what was good. Here's one of the kind of things that I recommend, in terms of the themes that I talk about in terms of strategies. I did something inadvertently that I didn't realize was a real kind of I think survival thing, and a really great strategy that I encourage other women to do. I reached out to a handful of people. I reached out to Andrea Owen, Tanya Geisler, a couple of other people who I saw as kind of further along the line for me business-wise, women who I really trusted, women who I knew were really grounded and walked their talk. And I sent them a very specific email asking for something very specific. I said, I'm launching this new website. I didn't say it in that voice, but I can almost, if you can imagine, that's the I'm launching this new website. I'm doing this whole rebrand. I'm totally changing my message. I'm out in myself. This is the thing that I'm going to be talking about. I sent them a screenshot of the homepage. I think on one hand, I'm doing something absolutely crazy. On the other hand, it feels like the right thing to do, the only thing to do. I need you to tell me this is the right thing to do. So I was like super specific. Please don't be critical. I'm too tender with this. Tell me this is the right thing to do. And I think I might have said, and if you don't think it's the right thing to do, then please just make some polite noises or something, because I was. And they were brilliant, and they kind of came back and said, this is what you've been talking about for a long time. It just kind of puts it into words. You don't realize how close you've been to this all the way along, and they were great. But I think having those fellow travelers, those other women who actively were saying, you have got this, we have got you, you are not on your own. It's that kind of circle, that sisterhood that
that's so crucial.
So crucial.
And I even tell people, even, that aren't running a business, just talking to any women that are starting this kind of work and starting to look at feminine conditioning. This is work that's better done not alone.
Oh, yeah.
So find a friend that you can talk to about it. Talk to your sister, talk to whoever, you
Yeah.
know, when you start seeing these things, because it's exactly what you said. You can't unsee it.
You can't.
You know, I wrote a post about this not too long ago, talking about like, have you been kind of like forcibly shoved out of your comfort zone and now you're locked out and can't come back in? And that's kind of what this is like, because once you see it, you can't look at anything the same.
No,
after that.
You really can't. Is it worth defining a little bit? What
I was just going to say, why don't we talk a little bit about, you know, what we mean when we're talking about feminine conditioning? And I almost feel like it's good to sort of talk about what internalized oppression is as part of that.
Yeah.
Because, you know, when we look at things like social dominance theory, which is the idea that culture is kind of organized in groups and the groups are ranked within the culture by how much power they have. When you talk about that, like in order to justify the fact that some groups, and yes, we mean white men here, have more power than others, you know, they're kind of like the top of the heap. For the groups that have less power, we have to sort of create within the culture these legitimizing myths. You know, we often refer to these as like stereotypes. And internalized oppression is what happens when the group that's oppressed starts to believe the myths about themselves. And feminine conditioning is essentially a form of this.
Yeah.
So that's not to say that you mentioned, you know, women of color, women of any other marginalized identity, like they're going to have, you know, probably different layers of internalized oppression that are kind of blended and layered and things like that. So that, you know, is even more work to sort of get through. But one of the things I mentioned before we started recording was that I feel like the myths of feminine conditioning are kind of organized into these two different eras, and you might have even more than two that you've identified. But, you know, the first is kind of the myths that we have about all women. So like women are the weaker sex and women are too emotional and women are just naturally more nurturing and they're bad at things like math and science. And then you kind of go ahead.
No. I was going to say, so there's those kind of, I suppose those kind of big macro level ones that we have. But then I think there's like another, so there's the kind of women are, and then I think there's the thing around how to be a good one then. So some of the things, it's a good thing to do, and some things it's a bad thing to do. So I think there's another component of it that kind
absolutely. And I think we get those like kind of macro ones the youngest. You know, those are like from the moment you're handed a doll when the boy next to you's handed a truck or whatever the case may be, like that's when that starts.
Yeah. Can I tell you something
Yeah.
horrifying that happened to me the other week?
Oh.
You've met my daughter, Maya.
Yeah.
She's just turned 9.
Yeah.
We were queuing up at the doctor's because she has asthma, so she has to go and have a flu jab once a year. And we were queuing up at the doctor's surgery. And there's a couple of nurses there who are waiting to give the flu jabs to everybody. And as we're chatting, one of the female doctors at our surgery comes out and calls for a patient. And Maya turns to me and says, "I've never seen that nurse before." And I said, "Oh, that's one of the doctors." And she went, "I didn't know women could be doctors."
Oh boy.
Oh my God. How have I failed this badly?
Wow.
Yeah.
Because it hasn't come up.
No.
And you know what I mean? Like every single topic in profession and whatever, like can't come up, right? And that's what our culture is still telling us.
Yeah. So if we think about, probably every doctor that she sees on TV, pretty much, although we have now started, I'm force feeding her Grey's Anatomy. Which I'm sure is going to show her a whole host of other things as well.
It's educational in its way, I'm sure.
Yeah. But yeah, so I think of every picture book when when she was little. The doctor is always a man, the nurse is always a woman, and it's just
wow.
I know.
Yeah, I know. And that's one of those things that I would have taken for granted in this day and age wouldn't be a thing anymore.
No, me neither. Me neither, no.
Holy
but
cow.
And there's still all kinds of horrifying research about how little girls still, and little boys still, assume an awful lot about girls and boys and the differences of girls and boys. That boys are stronger, boys are cleverer.
Yeah.
And that they've done some quite interesting studies about how much that is just gendered. So like boys, certainly when, you know, beneath certain, before adolescence, there's no difference in strength between girls and boys. There's no difference in intellectual ability. There's no difference in, you know, agility and whether someone can play football or soccer, or, you know, there's none of that. But yet they still are carrying around these cultural messages.
The perception is still there.
Yeah. So
it's so unconscious. It's not like anyone's telling them that overtly.
No, I think most of it is. I think there are definitely some conscious ones that we're told, and what I do find quite fascinating and horrifying in the Trump era, and it's not just Trump, you know, all these kind of right-wing would-be autocrats all across, you know, we have many of them in Europe as well, is that a lot of the things that we being the white feminists had assumed were no longer the things that were okay to say are now being said out loud again.
Yes, that's been a huge, you know, eye-opening thing the last few years, and I've had a hard time discerning if it's actually that they were still being said out loud, but those just aren't the people that I interact with, or if it's just that the media has now given that more of a voice, because I think it's a bit of both.
Yeah, I was listening to Rebecca Traister. We're going off in all kinds of different directions. I was listening to Rebecca Traister just this morning, and she was talking. She's got her new book out called Good and Mad, and I'm a big Rebecca Traister fan. I love the fact that she seems really like on the verge of, no, will you just listen to it? She's got so much energy and fire in her voice, even when she's like on genteel podcasts and things. But she was talking about how after the Women's March, so much of the mainstream coverage of it was really dismissive of it. Because it was women. So what are these women going to do? Okay, so they've had their shout, but you know, what's it actually going to do? What, they're going to go home now, and like maybe a few of them are going to apply to run to be on the school board, and it was so dismissive, so belittling.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
yet actually this was the biggest political demonstration.
Yeah,
in years, in decades.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the ways that, you know, women are swept under the rug, regardless of what they kind of accomplish. And that's kind of that like second, you know, like, so we talked about the feminine conditioning myths of all women, but then you get to the ones about some women.
Yeah.
And those are usually more about, you know, behaviors and the things that we're taught that we have to kind of comply with or adhere to.
Yeah.
So, and, you know, the all women myths are usually linked to things about like nature. They're, you know, biological, they're whatever. It's just the way things are. The other group is more linked, the choice group is more linked to nurture. So that's where we get into, and this is absolutely what I hear you talk about all the time, but like women being too vocal or kind of assertive, because that makes you a bitch, or, you know, too loud or too much. And these ideas that women should be giving no matter what, even at their own expense. We should just give and give and give.
Everyone else's feelings and everyone else's needs. But we should not be too loud. We should not take up space. We should not take up cultural space. Oh, we should definitely not take up physical space, because, you know, we need to be as teeny tiny as possible physically. So we have this whole diet culture that basically says you are wrong if you are above a certain size, but it's not just you are wrong, you are unlovable, you are unsexy, you are, you know, so much of our worth is defined by, can I swear on this?
Oh, fuck yeah.
Okay. So much of a woman's worth is tied up in, does a man think you're fuckable?
Yes. And what does that even mean? Because, you know, at the same time that we're conditioning women to believe that they have to look a certain way, and that certain way is achievable by less than 5% of the population. Be tall, thin, blonde, perpetually young, perfect symmetrical features, you know, big boobs, but tiny waist. You know, is just really not even a real thing in the grand scheme of the women in the world. And we're also conditioning little boys that that's the only thing that's worth wanting.
So if you even just think about that, so already you're saying to 95% of the population, you're wrong. You're wrong. Just by dint of your birth and your genes, which, you know, takes on an extra layer of, when you then add in white supremacy and the really overt white supremacy that's going on. So just by dint of your genetic makeup, you are wrong. But then, okay, so gals, all of you, you know, you're wrong, and you're not worth nearly as much as one of the skinny blonde ones, and they're not worth nearly as much as a man. So what we're going to do then is there are these certain things that you can really try and work really hard to do, and they might make you more acceptable. Well, we're already saying you're wrong. And those things about being more acceptable are things like, you know, don't be funny, don't be loud, don't be opinionated, don't be disagreeable, don't have any needs of your own.
Starve yourself, be a consumer of beauty culture and, you know, the multi-billion-dollar beauty industry and diet industry, because that, you know, that's what we really want from you. And think of that too from a social dominance perspective. When you tell 95% of the population that there's something inherently flawed about their physical body, that certainly is a good way to start keeping that portion of the population down already.
Is it Naomi Klein in the Beauty Myth says, you know, a great way to control a population is to keep them starving?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if that's who said it, but that, you know, that's something that like, I wrote about that in my thesis, like this idea of, you know, in a wartime situation, what's the first thing you do to the enemy or the people that you want to suppress is you cut off their supplies. You starve them out. But wouldn't it be so much easier if you could make them do it to themselves?
Oh, God, yeah.
Which is essentially what we've done.
And so that's where the internalized oppression comes in, because we're taught these rules early on, like by osmosis. So it's not necessarily someone sits you down and says, this is what you must do. It's like you get 7,000 images a day that says, this is how you need to be. You know, whether it be the images on TV or the magazines, or the fact that, you know, we have so few prominent world leaders who are women or women in power.
And the ones that we do have to walk this incredible tightrope of expectations compared to what they would have to do if they were a man.
Yeah, totally. It's like Hillary Clinton. It's just like, I feel like it was almost like, you know, that bit in Star Wars where it's, I can't remember who it is, Obi-Wan kind of goes, I was feeling a great disturbance in the force. I almost feel like the 2016 US election was like, like millions of women across the Western world kind of go, oh, that's how bad it is. So this super competent, really experienced woman who has dedicated her entire life to this and walked this tightrope as best as she possibly could. And there's abomination of a man, this cruel, foul, racist, misogynistic, utterly unqualified man still got chosen over her. It was like the scales fell away for a lot of us. I think even, I think for a lot of us white feminists as well, we kind of went,
although I think that was different in the US too, because even when she was first lady, there was a certain dismissive, very critical perspective of Hillary Clinton. And interestingly enough, also of Michelle Obama. You know, there was a lot of kind of, you know, the very little that they could even find to latch onto. You know, people would find ways to criticize, the expression on her face when someone said something, the, just different things like that. And that is one of the distinct differences I've seen between the right and the left, because I don't remember anyone on the left ever criticizing Laura Bush that way.
Mm.
And it, so I think that, at least for me here, when Hillary got the nomination, I knew it was going to be an uphill battle because of just the level of criticism that had just been part of her relationship with the public and with the media all along.
Mm. I can remember one of my friends who's in the US and chatting to her husband, who is a Republican, is still a Republican. He's a never Trump Republican, but he's still, very much a Republican. And this was before the election, and Trump was the nominee, and I was talking to him about it. And he said, "Oh, he's never going to get him elected." But it is a tough decision, because I honestly believe that Hillary Clinton is one of the most evil women in the world. And I was like, what? And I thought he was joking at first, but then he was telling me all about all the murders that they'd done. I was like, what? So I hadn't realized what a kind of conspiracy theory industry there was around the Clintons.
Yeah. And, people talk about the whole fake news on Facebook and this, that, and the other. But I think what, I guess for the people that never had family members or whatnot that were into all of this, that whole conspiracy theory is, and false news on Facebook and social media is just an extension of what's been happening on American talk radio for decades. Whether it's, I'm not even going to name them. I'm not even going to say their names, but let's just say there's a preponderance of disgusting old white men who have been, kind of coming out with all of this stuff for years about anyone who is not as far to the right as you could possibly be.
So I mean, we have elements of that over here, but not to the same extent. It's
the
more been on
newspaper. They are
newspaper.
allowed to say and incite in those forums is truly unconscionable.
Yeah, I guess that's the thing. We do have hate speech laws over here, anti-hate speech laws. So there are. Sometimes we have to enforce those lines, but there are lines that you can say, well, you can't incite someone to violence, you can't use racist language.
And it's often not necessarily that. I mean, it has gotten to that level in the last few years, but even like in the 90s, I remember hearing, I'll just say, Rush Limbaugh's radio show, and he would stop just short of that. It was like, I'm going to throw all of these, all of this misinformation and half-truths at people, and throw some other information about how this could be stopped in like a whatever, and it would be couched in this kind of like, it's amazing that someone hasn't done this, or it was like this stopping just short of connecting the dots, which is actually, from a manipulation standpoint, more powerful than if he had actually said someone should go do this.
Yeah. It's
scary stuff.
It's really scary, because I think, so one of the things that really frustrates me about the personal development industry, which is for our sins, the one that we operate in, so much of it still focuses on, this is just all in your head effectively, and so we just have to manage our mindset with this, and it will all be fine. And it frustrates the hell out of me, because yes, there are some things that are less helpful and more helpful to do to ourselves. We could do with doing some of the work on that internalized depression that we carry around and that misogyny, but we cannot ignore the system which we operate in. And so that there's also a very real impact to some people, and some women especially, women of color, if you're queer, if you're trans, if you're a marginalized group, that, and especially on social media, but that does horrifyingly spill over as well, in to actively and aggressively shutting people down through trolling, through threats,
Yes.
through intimidation. And that's very real.
Definitely.
Or even just that kind of minimizing and ignoring.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of my clients who is a woman of color will say, you know, I'm finding it really hard to get even responses from things I apply for, like to be on podcasts or, you know, for conferences or for networking. And I'm sure it has something to do with the fact that I'm a Black woman, but I can't prove it. So therefore I'm crazy, apparently. And who would I complain to about this? But, you know, it's all of that stuff goes on because that's the system that we operate in.
Right. And, you know, and there are things that we can do. Just starting to recognize this stuff gives you in some ways the option to at least say, oh, wow, this is my feminine conditioning kicking in and telling me that I need to be this. And I can choose whether or not I'm going to kind of follow that or not. The other thing I think you know, the more women we can make aware of these kind of issues is that we stop enforcing feminine conditioning norms on each other.
Yeah.
When we become, because there's a lot of girl on girl crime happening out there.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I really don't think you need to be so aggressive with that. And, you know, or I really don't think that, you know, I think it'd be better if we were all just nice. Why can't we just be women supporting women, which is fine, except that I see that happen so often when somebody's been called out on some behavior that is problematic, or there's the kind of the cliques that occur, or there's
and you're talking about how nicey nice we all are in the personal development industry. Like when we get out, you know, in the real world, I'm talking about she's a bitch, she's a slut, she's a whore. You know what I mean? It gets a lot more aggressive than that, right?
Oh yeah. I can remember, you know, working for one of the big three or the big four global kind of accounting consultants and firms, and just basically being told not to smile when I was on client site because people will think because you're a young woman that you will be just seen as dizzy and not you won't have gravitas, and basically they'll think you're just a dumb blonde like her over there. And this is to like a colleague in my team in front of her, and it was the whole thing. And this kind of this culture that we can sometimes fall into as women because we've been told that basically there's room for only one. You know, there isn't like this parity in terms of the amount of positions of power there. So therefore we all have to be fighting for the brass ring, and it's a knockout match. And
there's the one token female position.
Yes.
Fight amongst yourselves.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so destructive. But, you know, while we're fighting amongst ourselves, guess who's getting the promotion? Guess who's, you know, signing the big deal? Guess who's, you know, getting the bonus?
Yeah.
Not us.
Well, and you bringing that up about not smiling, that reminds me of something else that I wanted to bring up. And it's this idea of when we talk about feminine conditioning, everything that we're taught is kind of a catch-22 anyway.
Yeah.
So you don't want to smile because people won't take you seriously. But also, if you don't smile, people will think you're a bitch.
Yeah, rest in bitch face. Yeah.
You know, and there's so many of these things. It's like, you know, I remember in high school, the options were for girls, you could be a prude, a slut, or a cock tease. Those were the choices.
Yeah.
Which one was the good one? I still don't know.
No.
I mean, so it's kind of like this tightrope of expectations that's completely unreasonable and constantly moving. Yeah. And that just one of the things that really stood out to me about Dr. Ford's testimony in the Supreme Court confirmation was the tightrope that she was walking.
Oh, yeah.
It was painful to watch.
Oh my God, it was
to watch her sort of like have her resume read out, you know, with her advanced degrees and the fact that she was married. So a man found her worthy enough to marry, and she had kids. So she was a mother. So that makes her worth something. And like all of this, you know, kind of just for her to be able to be worthy of what? Having been almost raped? I mean, it's insane.
I know. And it was the little things like the way that she was a little bit self-deprecating, and she was friendly to these awful people who had dragged her here for this awful thing. But she was, making kind of little jokes to help them feel more comfortable. And we all know that game, and she played it expertly. And he got to yell and scream like the out of control.
Yes.
And that was just righteous anger on his part, apparently. And not only did he get confirmed, he's to the highest court in the land. She has had to move house for the 4th time.
I know.
Can't go back to work.
Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking. And that's the thing that patriarchy does. It kind of says, okay, these are the rules, but then we need to have sacrificial examples of, and this is what will happen if you step out.
What happens if you break the rules? Yeah.
So, you brush these things off, you don't tell, you don't, it will be boys that will be boys, and locker room talk, and were you drinking, and should you have been there, and really, isn't this your fault,
what
little
were you
lady?
Wearing?
All of that, all of that stuff. Okay, but if those things don't work, and you do have the courage, because it does take such courage to be able to speak out, and you then have to go through the 7 layers of hell, and you will still get, and I think she had said it herself, one of the reasons she didn't come forward was, do I stand in front of this train knowing that it will probably roll me over and it won't change the outcome? Do I do that to myself? She sacrificed her life. She knew what, maybe not exactly what was going to happen, but she had a pretty good idea, because we all have those examples seared into us about what happens when you do step out of line as a woman.
Mm-hmm. And yet we are both in the business of advocating for women to do it anyway.
Yeah.
Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Okay.
So after everything that we've just shared,
I know.
And the consequences and all of that, why do we think that women should still step up and be seen anyway?
Because it's the only way to create change, individually and culturally. Unless we can take up cultural space, unless we have more women's voices. I mean, I work with business owners, which in my mind, I was about to diminish my work there, and kind of, well, it's not as important as, people who work for Emily's List or the people who are, encouraging women to run for office. But there's something about, one of the passions that drives me is that the traditional workplace, that kind of, not that it's 9 to 5 anymore for anyone that I know, but that traditional 9 to 5 workplace was based on a model that was designed around men who had a wife at home who would do all of the domestic duties, take care of all of the kids, service his needs, and that would be it. And when women started entering the workplace in much larger numbers in the 70s and increasingly in the 80s and 90s, and that didn't change. The workplace changed very little. And so for many of us, especially when children come along, but not always, we just found that just does not work for us. And what technology has given us the opportunity to do is give us a viable alternative that we can take back some of that control and that agency. And that excites me a lot, because we can get some real cultural change there, because, well, if we don't need those big corporations, then maybe those big corporations don't have quite as much power, and maybe the shitty working conditions and the fact that, women still earn considerably less than men for the same kind of work. The fact that just by the fact that you have, a vagina means that you will not be paid as much as a man. You will not be valued in the same way. You will not be promoted in the same way. You will not have the same economic stability in the same way as you would if you were a man. And I'm very aware that I'm talking in very kind of binary gender terms here, and it's, if somebody is queer or somebody is trans, then those barriers are just, you can multiply that by 100 at least. And what technology's allowed us to do is give us more options. And we have the chance to take back some of that economic power. And we have the chance to take back some of that cultural power as well. And I think the two go hand in hand.
Technology has given us the ability to connect even for women that don't run a business, like even within those corporations, like the women that walked out at Google over the last week over, the fact that they've been had to settle sexual harassment claims and arbitration and, all these kinds of things. Like, that's powerful. And I'm so glad you brought up Emily's List, because those women, especially the women of color that stepped up and ran for office in this climate, in this world, that was an amazing act of courage. And
real courage. Yes.
100 women going to Congress.
It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. I was saying, I think just before we started recording, that I'd seen somebody on Twitter say, if you're having a bad day and you want cheering up, just imagine Mike Pence having to swear in the 2 Muslim women using the Quran. That just delights me.
And I mean, it's little things that I think are only now starting to filter through people's radar. Like in Texas, 19 women of color ran for judicial positions, and they all got in.
I saw that. Yes. That's huge. Many states now have super majorities. They've flipped them from the Republicans, and so things like that can create real change. But I think it goes back to one of those, that first thing that I said I almost stumbled upon initially, was that we have to do this collectively. We have to. One of the things that patriarchy does, especially with this pernicious idea that there's only room for one, and you can't trust other women, is that we have power in numbers, and we have power when we can connect, and we have I was reading stuff around the number of women who realized that they weren't the only Democrat in the region, because so many of them had been thinking, I can't tell any of my friends that actually I can't stand Donald Trump, and actually I'm a Democrat. And then, because it was so kind of intense after the election, that other women started connecting. They've connected through things like Pantsuit Nation and on Facebook and stuff like that. And they realized that there were other women like them around them. And suddenly, by raising our individual voices, what other women can hear them. And then we realize we're not alone, and it can break down some of that mass gaslighting that goes on.
Yes.
Because we think, I am seeing what I think I'm seeing. Yeah. I'm not crazy, and I'm not the only one. There's not something wrong with me. It turns out there are lots of people just like me. And technology gives us that ability. Yeah. I mean, it's given the far right that ability as well. We, by God, we should be taking some of that.
Absolutely. And knowing that we're not the only one, like, that is such a powerful thing.
Yeah.
Knowing that, because it is, when you're talking about like gaslighting and this kind of social conditioning, it's very easy to look around, and we live in a world that encourages us, especially with social media, to package our existence in a certain way, whether it's on social media or off. Think about showing up at your child's school to pick them up, or going to work. Like, there's this certain expectation of, I have to make this look both flawless and effortless all the time.
Yeah.
But when we start being real with other women and saying, no, actually, this is really fucking hard.
Yeah.
That is one of the most empowering things we can do.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Because it gives them permission to acknowledge that it's hard as well.
Yes. And then we can start having having conversations around, is there any way we can make this less hard then?
Yeah.
Are there some things that we can do? I that ability to show up and be seen and let other people see the reality. It's an amazing act of courage in this culture that tells us, be perfect, hide all of the, the things that you should be ashamed of. And when you show up and you kind of realize that, oh, I'm not the only one. That's super powerful.
Yeah, for sure.
Was
It's
it
one of
you
the
who was
most,
telling
that
me about?
connection is such a powerful thing.
Yeah. Was it you? I'm sure it was you who was telling me about how the biggest strides in terms of body image and self-esteem has been made through things like the body positivity movement and sharing images of fat women and short women
Yes.
and women of different
Yes.
body types on things like Instagram, and that has like a
Hmm.
measurable effect on
It
how.
does. Yeah.
Yeah, that blows my mind.
Yeah. In fact, Isabel Fox and Duke, who will be on another episode of this podcast,
Mm-hmm.
talks about that as, one of the ways, it's one of the only proven ways to kind of wrap your mind around a more expansive definition of what beauty is.
That rocks. That's amazing. See, stuff like that. That's amazing. That's so cool.
Yeah.
And
Exciting stuff.
it is. And so I think the more women's voices we have out there, that, the more people who are, saying things like, I'm a feminist, or I don't believe in diet culture, or, the more people who are out there saying that, the more then accepted that becomes as the norm,
Mm-hmm.
instead of the, oh, well, you just have to be thin, don't you? Otherwise you're, whatever patriarchy tells us we are. We don't need to reiterate those things. Or, well, you have to stand by men because, well, men just do that, don't they? That's just normal for men to do. And when you have, several million people going, no, that's, that gives us a pause, and we kind of go, oh no, that's not normal then, is it? And it starts to almost like break down the illusion.
Yeah. It starts to delegitimize those legitimizing myths. Totally.
Yeah.
So I want to shift gears a little bit, because I want to hear a little bit more about what you're doing, and I want you to talk about the Meaningful Business Academy.
Okay. So I do, I primarily work with service-based business owners, the coaches, the holistic folks, the consultants, primarily women, not exclusively, but I'd say about 95% women, and women identifying folk. And I help them to build sustainable businesses in a way that allows them and encourages them and supports them to show up fully as themselves, and to be able to drop some of the armor and the layers and the masks that we kind of have this idea we have to keep up in order to be accepted in the business world or in our culture. And actually, in my experience, they remain barriers if they're left in place. So it's really hard for people to, especially if you're a service-based business owner, people are hiring you. They're not hiring your washing powder or, your really nice.
They're not buying widgets.
They're not buying widgets. They're wanting to work with you. And so people have to be able to see you and to understand what you're about. And that includes things like your values, your beliefs, your skills, your brilliance. People need to be able to see that. And as women, we've been told to keep all that shit hidden. In fact, not even see half of that shit. My brilliance? What? Who, me? What are you talking about? No. We've been culturally encouraged to downplay all of our achievements, all of our brilliance. And the biggest pushback that I get initially is, I don't want to come across as obnoxious or arrogant, because women don't have a model to be in our greatness without having been told that, well, we're arrogant or we're showing off or we need to keep our voice down, please, and all of that stuff. And so a lot of my work is about encouraging and helping them to find that voice, and not find it because it's there all the time, but to bring that out and to really step into it. And then there's some business strategy stuff that goes along with it, but it's very much around, well, let's keep this sustainable. It's not, I am a massive have a big thing about the whole bro hustle till you drop marketing culture. So there's this really pernicious message that you should be working 16 hours a day if you want this badly enough, and all of that stuff. It's like, well, you know, for most women I know, we have like at least another job that we have to be doing in terms of, you know, caring for other people and making sure that, you know, we look acceptable, and, you know, there's so many additional things, caring responsibilities, housework, just, you know, maybe the fact we want to remain a rounded human being with, you know, our mental health intact. So working 16-hour days is not sustainable. And so I'm a big rejecter of that. And it's about how do we find ways of building these businesses so that they are truly sustainable, financially, energetically, emotionally, ethically. So we're not exploiting each other through our marketing, because there's some very kind of iffy, wonky marketing practices out there. How can we do this in a way that is respective and respectful?
I've heard you call it marketing with the dark arts.
Yes. Yeah.
I love that.
And so that's kind of how I work with people. And so people work with me one-on-one. Like I have this 9-month group program, the Supernova Collective, and I also have a membership academy called the Meaningful Business Academy, which is low investment each month because I want it to be like super accessible for people, and teaches you some of these elements around how do you find that voice, how do you do things like explain to people what it is that you do in a way that other people are going to get, which is particularly challenging if, you know, you are a feminist life coach, or actually a feminist life coach sums it up just perfectly and brilliantly, or, you know, if you do, you know, you have 3 different main modalities that you work in, and our industry says you should be telling people things like, I'll help you live your best life. Well, that's great for Oprah because she had a TV show every day. But for the rest of us, people kind of go, oh, that's nice.
What does that even mean?
Yeah, what does that even mean? So helping folks get really super specific on what it is that they help people with, and then how to do things like, you know, the marketing elements and stuff like that. So we have like monthly coaching,
and people can join the Meaningful Business Academy anytime, right?
Any time of the year. That's open all year round.
And working with you one-on-one is open all the time as well.
All the time. Occasionally I may have called to kind of close the books for a while when I get like super full, but right now I have a couple of slots open. Supernova Collective launches once, sometimes twice a year, because that's a more intensive program. But even if I say so myself, it's a pretty good program just because of the people who come join it.
I would second that. It's a brilliant program. So the last thing I want to ask you is if you could share one thing with the audience of this podcast, or with women in general, that might surprise them, what would it be?
I would say that the internal dialogue that voice that you have in your head that says all those awful mean things to you, that you're really scared somebody else will, if anybody else found out what that voice said and what you actually said to yourself, and everybody has a voice like that, and it's saying things just as mean. Yeah. And it doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It just means that's what our culture does to us. And there's a way, you don't have to listen to that voice. And it's not telling you the truth. In fact, it's a fucking liar, that voice. 99% of the time, it's a liar. And I have to say that was a revelation to me when I discovered that other people had that voice in their head too.
To me too, yeah.
Yeah. And talking about the stuff that makes you feel vulnerable doesn't feel the greatest. I have to say, I still don't enjoy feeling vulnerable, but it is the fastest way to get a real connection with people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one of those things that you're almost always really glad that you did it afterward.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Jo. It's been so much fun talking with you, as always.
Thank you for having me. This has been fun.
It's been lovely.
It has. It's been really great. It's just a weird thing. People are going to hear our conversation. And I'm trying to go back in my head going, did I stick to the point? No, I didn't. I kind of went all over the place, but I hope it was useful. And it's always delightful talking to you because you're just so smart at pulling together all of these different threads. So thank you for letting me hang out with you. And
yeah, absolutely. And I will put the Meaningful Business Academy and links to Joe's website and some other fun tidbits in the show notes.
That'd be awesome. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much.